Chapter 3, Fear and Loathing in Cocoa Beach. The next morning I was lying in bed with no hockey team to play for, no school to go to, and a growing sense of nothing to live for. I heard the phone ring. A few minutes later, the door to my room flew open. It was my dad standing there, hands on his hips, with a disgusted look on his face. He had just learned what happened. "This is the worst day of my life since your mother killed herself," he said. Well, there it was, out in the open at last. We argued. I tried to tell him that I hadn't done anything, a lie, and that the school principal and the AD had no proof, the truth. He didn't want to hear it and stormed out. My brother Jason, then about 10, asked my stepmom what was going on. She made a point of saying loud enough for me to hear, "Your brother's a drug addict." Good morning. For a couple of days, I was now in shock over what had happened to me at Northview. My hockey career over in an instant, along with my high school education, and I wasn't the only one. I was stunned, Coach Cooper says. Looking back on it today, he says, "I wanted you punished, but not kicked off the boat without a life jacket." Of the school administrators who made the decision, without Coop's input, he says, "I've come to know these men and respect them, but at that moment, I definitely felt they overreacted." As far as my dad was concerned, I had screwed up for the last time. Our little fight that morning ended with me being kicked out of the house. I crashed at the house of my girlfriend at the time while I tried to get back into high school. First, I applied to Whitmer, our hockey rival. The response by their administration was pretty much the same as their boisterous fans. Crandall sucks. They didn't want any part of me. Neither did any of the other area schools I applied to. So there I was, an 18-year-old drug addict with no home to go to, no school to go to, and within a few days, no job to go to either. Anderson's, a big home and garden store, fired me from my menial job. As is common with people who walk around in a drug-induced haze, there are unexpected moments of startling clarity. I had one of these a few weeks after being expelled. I realized that I didn't want to end up pumping gas or delivering pizzas for the rest of my life. I decided I was going to have to lose face, bow down, and make nice to whomever I had to in order to get back into Northview, starting with my dad. They weren't going to let me back in if I listed my address as Sylvania Park. Dad agreed to allow me to return home, provided that I remained sober. I responded with the big drug addict mantra, sure, yeah, I promise. I had no intention, of course, of fulfilling that part of the bargain, but I was determined to get back to Northview. First, we tried the aggressive approach. I showed up with our attorney one night at a school board meeting. They wouldn't even let us speak. But that summer, for reasons unexplained, they changed their mind. I was told I could re-enroll at Northview in September to finish the last few credits I needed to earn my diploma. I was glad for the opportunity, but coming back was a humbling, humiliating experience. In the halls, in the classrooms, in the cafeteria, I'd hear the whispers and mutters. It's Crandall. Kicked off the team. Can't play hockey anymore. Screwed up big time. Still doing drugs. All of it true. I had been a big shot just a few months earlier, but my original class had now graduated and moved on to college, the service, or full-time jobs, and I was still sitting in algebra class like some idiot who had been left back. It was a lonely time. Most of the other kids had been warned about me and told to stay away, but one girl saw something beyond the teenage pariah I had become. Her name was Kathleen, a blonde, straight-laced, all-American girl from the heartland. She sensed there was more to me than the drugs, the booze, the bad news loser reputation that I was deservedly tagged with. We started dating. She a junior cheerleader, me a fifth-year cocaine-addicted senior. For a little while, Kathleen actually got me to stop doing blow. Quite an achievement, considering that at the time I was doing about a gram a day, most of it before or after school. I wasn't going to take the risk of having someone rat me out again. She told me she didn't care what happened in my past. She liked me for who I was, and she saw through my feeble attempts to live up to her good guy expectations. When she heard I was back drinking and doing coke, that was it. She broke up with me. That night I got really loaded. I hated myself so much, and I couldn't even figure out why. Was it because I screwed up the first real relationship I had ever had, or because I was becoming a complete slave to my addiction? Guess it didn't matter why I was trying to destroy myself. The important thing was that I succeeded. To that end, I spent the following summer getting completely lost in my addiction. I had earned my high school diploma, not a GED, but a diploma from Northview. I took some pride in that. I had gone back and faced the music, eaten a lot of crow, but gone on to do something right for a change. I could and should have used that modest achievement to propel my life in a different trajectory. Instead, I applied my drive and commitment in other directions, such as seeing how many days in a row I could drink at least one six-pack of beer. I kept track of this, believe it or not, on a calendar. For every day I drank 6 or more, I'd mark the date with a little red dot. Soon the calendar was filled with red dots. I was delighted. It was also around this time I got the idea in my head that I wanted to go to Florida. Somehow I felt that if I could leave Sylvania and visit my maternal grandmother in Bradenton, she'd help me figure out how and why my life had gone wrong. I talked about this a lot, every time I got really drunk. One night I was out partying with a friend in Bowling Green. After several hours of drinking, I actually tried to make the road trip. Last thing I remember was lying in a waterbed with a girl named Lisa, who was writing her name in orange marker on my chest, and I was telling her about how I was determined to go to Florida. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor of a cheap hotel room. No waterbed, no Lisa, no orange marker, nothing but a sick, nauseous feeling and a sense of dread as to just where the hell I had ended up. I picked up the phone and a woman with a southern accent answered. "Where am I?" I asked groggily. "You're in Perry, Georgia," she replied politely. It was 2 days later. How I got from Ohio to Georgia and what I did on the way, I still don't know. I was almost out of money at that point, so I had to head back home. It was shameful. I couldn't even run away successfully. I arrived back in Sylvania early the next morning and walked up the stairs just as my dad was heading to work. He looked at me and said, "You're nothing but a drunk," shook his head, and walked past. I didn't say a word because I knew it was the truth. I was a drunk, an alcoholic, an addict. At what point does that happen? When do you become addicted to drugs or alcohol, or anything else for that matter? It's hard to say, in part because addiction is a difficult concept to pin down. People are often accused of being addicted to shopping, cell phone use, ice cream, Survivor, you name it. Is Tom Cruise a relationship addict? Was the headline in a recent online news item about the movie star's many loves. Are these really addictions in the same way as alcohol or drugs? Yes, according to some definitions of addiction. Webster's, for example, defines it as to give oneself up to a strong habit. If that's an addiction, well then my wife Melissa is addicted to General Hospital, and my co-author, a New Yorker with a strong penchant for the same breakfast every morning, is addicted to bagels. And maybe Tom Cruise is addicted to relationships. A better definition, I think, is this one, from a dictionary of psychological terms. Addiction is an uncontrollable compulsion to repeat a behavior regardless of its consequences. That, quote, consequences part is a key to what psychologists believe determines addiction. Provided it isn't affecting your life or health in an adverse way, watching a lot of TV, shopping, or enjoying a certain kind of food on a daily basis is not an addiction. No harm, no foul seems to be the current thinking. Given that I was doing a lot of harm to myself and others around me as a result of my uncontrollable compulsions to drink and use drugs, you could say I was a full-blown addict by this time of my life, age 18. The full-blown concept raises another question. Are there degrees of addiction? Yes, say the experts. In fact, there's an addiction severity index, a sort of addict rating system involving an in-depth interview with the subject that delves into the family situation, frequency of use, work, and arrest record, a myriad of factors. Underlining this, of course, are dozens of theories as to why addiction occurs in the first place. The disease model, addiction is an illness. The moral model, addiction is a character flaw. The genetic model, addiction is a part of your hereditary makeup. The cultural model, addiction is the result of cultural influences. As discussed earlier, all of these views have their proponents, and each makes sense to a degree. In my mind, however, none can fully explain addiction, at least my addiction or those of the people I now work with regularly. In most addicts, each of the four most common causal factors is in play to a greater or lesser extent. They also, in my opinion, allow addicts like me to do something we learn to be very good at, finding someone or something to blame for our problems. My addiction is my mother's fault because I inherited the, quote, bad genes from her. My addiction is my father's fault because he remarried and didn't give me the love, support, and attention I needed. My addiction is my principal's fault because he kicked me out of school, sending me into a downward spiral. My addiction is Motley Crue's fault because I was a big fan of the band and I heard they all like to party. Nonsense. Sure, some of those factors might have played a role. Ultimately, though, it came down to me making bad choices and doing the wrong things. Later on, when I started making a few good decisions, things began to change. But not yet. Indeed, at this point of my life, I was about to make some colossal bad decisions. First, my half-hearted attempt to go to college had ended when I quit the University of Toledo after a few weeks of class, in which I was too wasted to remember anything any of my professors said. Then, in October, I had the big fight with my parents, in which I threw my dad into the closet and my hockey trophies got smashed. I got the boot after that, again. In December 1986, with the Midwest winter wind starting to whip up, I blew out of Sylvania. I needed to get away from a town where the cops knew me, the parents hated me, and the kids either lionized me for the wrong reasons or laughed at me behind my back for being a drunk. Out of several forays to the Sunshine State, this would be my quintessential Florida trip, like something out of a Hunter Thompson book. 4 of us got into my 1984 Buick Regal and headed once again down Route 75 south. One of my buddies, Chip, had just won $150,000 in an insurance settlement, so we had money to burn. We took with us close to a half ounce of Coke, street value about $2,500, a fifth of Bombay gin, a case of beer, and probably a couple ounces of weed. With the windows of my Buick tinted, for precisely this reason, we could freely dip into our stash. It's funny how quickly the original purpose of my trip to see my grandmother was forgotten. The first night we arrived, we went into a pool hall in Cocoa Beach. I met a 15-year-old local named Dawnetta. After just 15 minutes, she was performing oral sex on me in the parking lot. Another guy, a Trinidadian named Derek, told us where we could find drugs. We did. Soon we were all over the place. Some nights sleeping in my car, other nights in hotels paid for by our buddy with the insurance money. There were women, lots of women in Florida. Especially there was Sherry, a beautiful big-haired blonde from Canada on holiday with her parents. Like Kathleen, she saw something beyond the scruffy, dirty, drunken bum she met on the beach. We hung out a lot, and I began to sense that this was someone I really could care about. I sensed that she felt the same way, even though at the end of each day she'd go back to her hotel with her parents, and I'd go back to my suite in the Buick Regal. The next morning, there she'd be, knocking on the passenger seat window to wake me up. Looking back, it's still amazing that she would want to spend so much time with someone like me. Heck, her parents invited me to join them for dinner one evening. We talked about Canada, about hockey, had a great time, and enjoyed the meal and one another's company. I had made it not a point to get too hammered that day, and it dawned on me at the end of the night that these people actually liked me, not the drunken fool that I had become. That night after Sherry and her parents left Cocoa Beach, I was depressed and headed out to the beach alone. But a good thing happened to put me right again. A guy we had met came by and told us that we could move into his condo. Who the hell knows why? Maybe he thought it was cool to have a couple of derelicts from Ohio in his pad. I immediately headed back to the Regal, found my buddy Bob, got our stuff together, and moved in. When this guy saw all of the cases of booze we brought in and the Motley Crue posters we immediately hung up on the wall, I bet he had second thoughts. He probably thought the Toledo chapter of the Hells Angels had set up residence in his condo. Too late, pal. We were ready to party. Later that same day, we went back to the beach to start drinking, and another good thing happened. A really hot-looking girl with long black hair and a pink bikini came over to me. "Hey, would you like to party with me tonight?" she said. I looked over my shoulder as if to say, "Are you really talking to me?" But she was. Her name was Katrina, and she was on spring break from Georgetown University. She came to the new house later that night. I opened the door to find her standing there wearing a long, black, low-cut dress and high heels. I had on only a pair of unbuttoned jeans. She didn't care. "Let's go out to dinner," she said. "I'm buying." After an awesome dinner, we went back to the house, and she'd asked if I'd like some cocaine and champagne. I thought I was dreaming, but there it was. She had a big bag full of Coke and a bottle of the bubbly that she had stuck in my refrigerator before we left. Katrina did a few lines with me, but mainly just watched as I snorted and drank away. As we were getting buzzed, she asked if she could put makeup on me. Makeup? Okay, I thought to myself, this is weird, but what the hell, she paid for all this stuff, so whatever. She began putting eyeliner on me and painting my fingernails as I continued to snort lines and suck up the champagne. Finally, after I was all made up like some South Beach transvestite, she said, "Let's go back to the beach." We walked along the shore, and as soon as we were in a secluded spot, she turned to me and demanded that I make love to her at that moment. Gee, I thought, won't my makeup get smeared? Actually, I didn't think about much at all. We had sex, she left, and I woke up the next morning on the couch with my friends howling in laughter at my eyeliner. "What are you, auditioning for Kiss?" one of them said. I never saw or heard from Katrina again, and I always wondered just what that was all about. Some lesbian fantasy? Or maybe she was just a frustrated makeup artist. Either way, I didn't care until I realized that it had taken me exactly 24 hours to break my pledge to Sherry, that I would not see another woman until she visited me in Ohio, which we had planned for that fall. I felt like a crumb and responded to that emotion the best way I knew how. Let's get loaded. Back on Cocoa Beach, I was sitting watching the waves when a powerfully built African-American woman came up to me. She was huge, about 6'4", and a muscular 200 pounds. She claimed to be a wrestler and wanted to know if I wanted to go find some coke with her. "I'm there," I said. We managed to score, went back to our condo, and started smoking crack out of a Budweiser can. We were getting really stoned, and suddenly who should appear but Dawnetta, the girl I met on my first night in Florida. She tracked us down and was back for more fun. Soon the wrestler and I were all cracked up, and she and Dawnetta got into a debate over who could give better oral sex. They asked me to be the judge, which of course I was delighted to do, sucking on my beer can crack pipe as they proved their prowess. I relate these stories today not to brag about sexual conquest, but rather to underscore just how messed up I was. This was meaningless, mindless sex. As with everything else in my life at that point, it was also done in a way that could maximize my risk. The AIDS epidemic was already running rampant, and yet I never used protection. Sex was just one more way to fill the void. Consequences be damned. Not all the interesting people I met in Florida were women. One day we were hanging around in a hotel room on Cocoa Beach when a guy called, quote, the Nail, showed up and asked if we wanted any drugs. He said he had earned his nickname not because he was tough or a carpenter, but because he could shove a full-size nail up his nose and you would not be able to see it. Why not? Because, quote, Nail had no nasal cavity, the result of snorting a lot of drugs, and probably being smacked in the face by an iron pipe. It's not surprising. Consider Nail's drug of choice, methamphetamine, also known as crystal or crank, is a more powerful and dangerous stimulant that's more popular today than it was in the 1980s. So when Nail doled out a couple of lines of it on the table in our hotel room, we were intrigued. This was something different. I did 2 lines of Nail's meth, about the length of my finger, and within 5 minutes I lost my mind. I became enraged and destructive. I smashed 2 windows in the hotel room, threw the TV out of one of them, ripped the shower curtain rod off the wall, and nearly broke the bed in half by jumping up and down on it. I ended up staying awake for 2 days from the stuff, despite attempts to drink myself into unconsciousness. Despite this meth-induced excitement, Cocoa Beach was getting old. Time to move on. Over the next few months, we traveled around the state of Florida: Orlando, Miami, St. Petersburg, Fort Myers, Jacksonville. It was like an old movie, where you see a montage of signposts as our hero makes his way on some great journey. Except if this was to depict my life accurately, you'd have to show me puking over one side, passed out by another, and urinating on a third. In Boca Raton, I did my, quote, Scarface thing. Through a cousin of Chip's, we met up with some big-time narcos at a bar and went back to their mansion. There were guns there, bodyguards, and a ton of cocaine, which we were invited to partake of. I didn't have to be asked twice. The lines on the pool table were 2 fingers thick and as long as my leg. I tried to do an entire line in one huff. Soon my chest was pounding so fast from all the coke I'd ingested, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. The smartly dressed dealers watched me, laughed, and made comments to each other, some of them in Spanish. I noticed that most of them weren't even doing any coke. Looking back, it's a miracle they didn't take out a chainsaw, cut me into pieces, and throw me into the ocean for snorting up so much of the merchandise. On the other hand, Maybe they were amused by seeing somebody who so obviously enjoyed their product. Besides, you couldn't do all that coke they had in that house. Believe me, I tried. Anyway, I woke up the next day miles away, on Miami Beach, along the part of the strip with the faded Art Deco hotels, amid the homeless men. I almost felt like one of them now. A couple of nights later, we had moved on and were sleeping in my car when we were awoken by a pounding on the windshield. A very scary-looking guy was outside, screaming incoherently. He had a Schlitz malt liquor bowl tattooed on his shoulder, and he was missing a few teeth. Maybe he wanted drugs or money, or maybe just a place to sleep, but I told my buddy Bob to lock the car doors, quick. The lunatic outside was threatening to smash the passenger side door. We kept telling him we didn't have any drugs. Eventually, he staggered off. It scared the hell out of me. Not long after that, I was in a parking lot of St. Petersburg, Florida. I had been drinking all night and was face down on the pavement. In my stupor, I felt a tap on the back of my head. I thought it was one of my buddies fooling around. I rolled over to find myself looking up at a cop, brandishing a nightstick. "If you can't stand up, you're going to jail," he said. I clawed at the side of my car to pull myself up and somehow managed to stand erect. He glared at me and walked away. It was now June. I had been in Florida for 6 wasted months. 6 more, I realized, and I'd probably be dead. From now on, I was going to get loaded in the safety of Sylvania. The next day, we headed back.